Boop. Go away. So we were here because we finished this, right?
Yes.
So we are here. Fantastic. Then we will go to the next part.
Okay. So let's talk climate in Africa. A lot of stuff, right? I know you guys are excited to talk about climate on Monday.
My favorite.
It's a favorite thing. It's the best way to break up Africa, from what I understand, from what I've studied, from what I've seen, is basically Saharan Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southern Africa. Because basically you have similar climates all along there. Though technically you can also do Western and Eastern Africa. There are certain similarities between those places as well, differences I should say. But for the most part, we're breaking up that way. Sub-Saharan, Northern, and Southern. Of course, Saharan is, desert. It's the desert. That's what it's called. That's what it is. It's the thing. Then you have the tropical area, everything from tropical rainforest to this area of the savanna, which is the grasslands that we tend to think of when we think of Africa. It's actually in the east and kind of south of that, which, the thing that people tend to think about, like in terms of wildlife reserves, a lot of those are actually in the southern part of Africa. It's actually neat. You can go online and check out a website called Africam, and they've got all these different nature preserves webcams that update real time, and they're all placed along water sources, and that's the best place to catch wildlife because everything is green. And there's some pretty cool things, like you can see, looking at it. Of course, a lot of times you're looking at water, and there's nothing there. But a lot of times you can see some pretty cool stuff. A lot of monkeys, stuff like that. Monkeys are basically rats, by the way. Well, I don't mean literally, not biologically, but rather they have the same reputation in other places in the world. Like, how we would react if a rat was found falling around in our food or something like that. That's how you react to the monkeys in there. And monkeys are violent, dude. Seriously, you don't mess with monkeys. I remember a dude telling me when he was in the Navy in the Philippines, one of the worst duties you could have was taking out the garbage, not because it was hard per se, but because you would be attacked by monkeys every single time because they were trying to get in the trash. And so they actually had to send it out in two-man platoon, basically. One guy to carry the garbage, the other guy armed with a broom and one of those little garbage can lids, like the metal ones, like a shield. And just basically swat the monkeys away from the other dude so he doesn't get bit because, rabid monkeys. Once they steal things, they're kind of butt faces like that. I don't know why I got a attention about monkeys. Anyways, moving on. But again, don't forget that a lot of Africa is actually a plateau, so it's got some elevation kicking as well that affects its weather.
All right, that's pretty much it. For that slide, we're moving on to another one. Suddenly, I'm crushing your hopes and dreams. That's what I get paid to do. You think I'm here to teach you things? No. I'm here to crush your dreams.
Pink Floyd told me so. Anyways. Anyway, it's a region culture. You're distracting me. Let's talk history for a second. What do you guys know African history? Anything you can say about the history of Africa?
I think I like tribes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
First of all, let's analyze this for the insanity that is. What do you guys know about the history of, say, Europe, or the history of Asia, or the history of North America? There's a lot to be told, isn't there? Because, we tend to focus on when the Europeans showed up, otherwise known as the post-contact period. But there's a whole lot more Native American history we have absolutely no idea about. Why is that, do you think? Why don't we know a lot of history about the Native Americans or the pre-colonial Africans? Well, they did. They absolutely did. No, we can't do that.
Because we treat them as like slaves.
Well, you're getting on the right track. It's not just slavery.
Because we don't care to
Well, we did worse than that. And by we, I mean Europeans. I want to say, like, you were responsible for this because we don't do that in history. But put it this way. There's a concept in history known as social Darwinism. And it's important to understand if we're going to talk about the history of Africa. First of all, please understand, we are discovering more and more history that is pre-contact Africa every single year. There's research going into it. Archaeologists are trying to understand, put pieces together, but a lot of what was once known is lost. Not to say that nobody knows this history. There are legends, there are stories, and things like that. But as far as things that we can accurately say, like these are the times that these people did this, that, the other, when it comes to pre-European contact, it starts to get a little fuzzy. Add into this the difficulty we have understanding the different ethnicities and different peoples all throughout Africa. That's what I'm saying. Someone's going to like, no, you're wrong. We know more than thou, that sort of thing. But from my experiences in looking into pre-colonial, pre-contact Africa, things get really, really difficult to nail down. Legends or word of mouth happening with history, is only reliable to a certain degree. We have to be able to nail things down, be able to like actually have physical evidence to support these claims. And the fact of the matter is in order for there to be history, we have to maintain this. We have to keep a record of some fashion. That's one of the beautiful things about the internet. Not only does it give you access to information from all around the world, but it records history on a day-to-day basis. For instance, all those people who get on Instagram or what have you start writing, today I had this for lunch, it was delicious. They take pictures of their lunch, right? All right, let's talk from a historian standpoint, 10,000 years from now. Do you guys know what people ate in this region of the world 10,000 years ago? No idea. 10,000 years from now, people will absolutely say, hey, this is what this person had. It says it looks pretty good. Maybe they can find a recipe. They can reproduce it on their own. Yes? This is history. We are living history. History is just a matter of looking from a forward times back, which is a truly mind-blowing thing when you think about how space and time are the same thing, which is theoretical physics. It's not really theoretical, it's true, but anyhow, it's mind-blowing. But I'm getting off on another tangent. Let me get back to social Darwinism. First of all, do you guys know who Darwin is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the scientist, sure. What did he come up with? What did he say was, this is true and this is evolution? Okay. How does evolution work?
Over time, a species changes and adapts.
That's generally the proper answer here is adaptation. But here's the thing: is let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. Okay. The way to understand how evolution works is to understand the concept of natural selection. You guys know what natural selection means? What about artificial selection? Because it's backwards, but I think it's the easiest way of understanding what it means. Let's talk artificial selection for a second. How many of you guys have a dog? Okay. All dogs are based off of what other animal? The descendants of wolves, yeah. Everything from the Alaskan Mountains to the Chihuahuas of the world, yeah? How are they so incredibly different?
They change depending on where they live. Breeding.
Yeah.
I'm not teaching.
Breeding. You're absolutely right. It's humanity. We change dog breeds. Why do we do that?
Because we can.
Not because it's so much the environment we're interested in. In some cases, maybe. Well, yeah, but we do it for a hobby?
Just because we can.
What's the purpose of a dog? Maybe today. Right. They had jobs, For instance, going back to the Alaskan Mountains, they're sled dogs. Yes, they're supposed to be able to handle the cold, but also they're supposed to want to work. Anyone ever known anybody who has an Alaskan Mountain or a Husky? They are like, they get fat and angry whenever they can't work. They're dogs that are made to herd animals, for shepherds to have. There's kind of this interesting herding tradition. Like, for instance, if you get like an Australian shepherd, whatever, and you have little kids, they will actually herd your kids. Like if the kids get too far away from you, they'll start pushing them back towards you.
That is so cute.
It's their instinct. It's what they've been bred over centuries by human beings to do. Yes, you know this is true, right? That is artificial selection. We have artificially influenced nature, okay? And we've done this in animals and plants. You know, there are many different plants out there that should not exist in the natural world, but we have created them through genetic engineering, which, by the way, selective breeding is a form of genetic engineering. If you look at thoroughbred racing horses, they look really weird compared to what horses look like. I mean, they look sleek and athletic, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're hideous creatures. What I'm saying is that they're not natural. They have been artificially selected for the genes we want, fast horses, okay? Now let's take this one step further. Does nature select things through the environment, which is what we were getting to over here? Yes, it does. But it doesn't mean that the animal changes to reflect nature. That's not how it works. Instead, the animals that do not survive cannot live long enough to pass on their traits, their genes. And so what happens as the climate changes or as the environment changes, animals that basically don't have the natural fortitude or abilities will die off. Great example of that is giraffes. Again, I like giraffes. If you think about giraffes, why do they have such long necks? It's a great example. Because think about it. Whenever you're in a survival, life or death situation, if you don't have enough food, you starve to death, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine every single one of you is competing for food, right? There's not enough for everyone to survive. So you got to get whatever food you can to survive, right? Who's going to survive? What traits would give you an advantage to survive, but it's dropped a ton of food right here?
The strongest.
The strongest. Yeah, the strong survive, yes? That's Darwinian theory, okay? So in the case of giraffes, it's not so much that they're fighting for food, but rather, if you imagine all these big bushy plants and things like that, everybody can reach the low-hanging branches, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But only the ones with taller necks can hit the taller ones, yeah? And so basically, imagine if, I hung food really high, all the short people would starve to death. So all the taller people would survive, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Now, over centuries of this happening, of the taller people surviving and passing on their genes, you have basically a whole mass of taller people, you're going to have even taller people born. And so on and so forth. We continue this trend. Now, eventually, people born so tall, or in this case, giraffes' neck will be so big, their heart can no longer pump enough blood to their head, so they just die stillborn. They don't survive on a limb. So clearly, they don't survive long enough to pass on their genes. So it hits a natural point. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing changing. It's not like we're evolving in terms of like you're mutating. It's it's that there's these pressures that predict these, or not predict, that preclude certain types of animals to survive. Now we can of course influence this. We can keep animals that would be wiped extinct alive even past a point. Take koalas for instance. Koalas should all be dead. They're not. And it's not just human beings. People will kind of be like, well, human beings are responsible. No, we're really not in this case. Because they've all developed syphilis, for the most part. Something like 90% of the population. So, not to mention, they have a very particular dietary needs that really the environment doesn't support. So we have kept them alive because they're cute and fluffy. So this is, again, look at chihuahuas. Chihuahuas are stupid.
I hate chihuahuas.
I just mean not so much that they're dumb, although they are. I mean in terms of their survivability. Think about it. A little tiny dog with a giant head, that gets eaten by bigger dogs, How is it still alive? Because we think it's cute, we put it in purses. Yeah. I don't disagree with you, but there are people who think this way, and I'm not going to hate on them. But, they should pick a real dog, kind of rat. Anyways, so this is how Darwinian theory works. Okay, now let's talk social Darwinism. Back to the original point. What is social Darwinism? Let's apply the same philosophy, but instead of looking at animals and plants, let's look at races. And suddenly everything gets very uncomfortable. Clearly, certain races of people are superior to others because look at their civilizations. The ones that survive, survival of the fittest, right? They conquer other nations because they're racially better than they are. Suddenly we got very racist, yes? Okay. By the way, Adolf Hitler, anybody? Yeah, that's kind of what he thought. He was a social Darwinist. This philosophy was applied by Europeans to Africans. It was applied by, Americans against Native Americans. Basically, anytime there was somebody, a group of people that were undesirable, well, they're just racially inferior. In fact, we're doing them a favor by enslaving them because they get to be part of our civilization. And ours is so much better than theirs. This is the belief.
Yeah, people.
So let's take this one step further. So your culture's wrong and stupid. Stop speaking that stupid barbaric language you speak. Speak a nice European language. Stop your cultural practices. It's dumb. Who cares what your history is? It's irrelevant. Now you've been saved from yourself. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Their culture was suppressed. Now they've been trying to get back. There's many different organizations throughout Africa that are attempting to reclaim what has been lost. But it's a difficult process when you're talking about centuries of information that's been lost. You know what I'm saying? And it's kind of sad when you get right down to it. But this is, again, one of the beautiful things. With evidence, we can go back and find, to some extent, what happened before. We can regain this information, at least to some extent. But it's going to be a long process. It's going to be a long work. Now, there's a few kingdoms we can look at to kind of get an idea of how Africa was involved. One of the things we were talking about is they didn't speak a language that we understood. Well, that's kind of the interesting thing is, you guys know the Silk Road, right? The Silk Road actually connects all the way through northern Africa. So a couple trade kingdoms grew up in this area, such as Ghana, that benefited from the Silk Road. They actually exported gold, which we think, well, gold is, what's so special about gold? Gold's kind of a funny thing when you get right down to it because, most of the precious things we have, like gemstones and things like that, have no real purpose. They're shiny rocks. Diamonds can be used in tools. They're very hard, so we can use them there. Gold is actually something that has a lot of uses. For instance, have you guys ever heard of gold teeth? You know why we make gold teeth? Gold does not break down, it does not rot, and also it does not rust. It is also a fantastic electrical conductor, not only what that is teeth per se, but we can use it for all kinds of wiring and things like that. It has intrinsic value. It's also really cool because it's one of the softer things. It comes in all kinds of shades and hues, things like that. Gold is neat. It has been a source of income, of value to human beings since time immemorial. But it also means if you've got lots of gold, it means you can control trade. Now, eventually they fell apart, and I'm not going to get into that because we're not going to study a whole bunch of history. Because also I'll probably get it wrong. I'll be honest, I'm not really familiar with a lot of African history, but we can look at general trends. Specifically, there was an early people called the Bantu, B-A-N-T-U. You should have that already written down from the previous section. They immigrated from Western Africa all throughout Africa and basically gave rise to most of the ethnic groups in Africa. It's the largest, most influential one. As far as Northern Africa is concerned, you had some of this, but you also had some Europeans, you had a lot of Arab culture there, and that all kind of blended into something that is uniquely Middle Eastern, but also sort of African. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, tomorrow I'm going to have you guys look at a website of, it's a cool policy. Basically, it's a bunch of students in African countries who are trying to talk about their experiences and their culture from their perspective. It's also got a good amount of background in terms of political situations, what type of food they eat, music they listen to, all this different types of stuff. And you get a blend of the fact of understanding that Africa is kind of similar to Europe in the sense that their traditions, this pride in their traditions that has resurged since the end of the colonial days, has really characterized a lot of their future in terms of understanding who they are. That being said, there's a lot of stereotypes we need to try to disabuse ourselves of. So we'll kind of see a little bit of this later. As far as the colonial period is concerned, there's a number of things that this is going to have in terms of effects on Africa. First and foremost is the transatlantic slave trade. You guys are probably familiar with this. I'm assuming you've studied the transatlantic slave trade in American history before, yeah? Well, understand this too. Slavery is not a concept that's foreign in the world. It's all throughout the world. And initially, the way that slavery worked was basically, in warfare. Warfare was fought for the purpose of controlling territory, and basically, if you could capture an enemy soldier alive, then they basically were your slave now. So this could be utilized for labor back at home, just like we think of as slavery, although generally speaking, from what I've seen in terms of studies, the experience of slaves in Africa was a lot better than when they got to the New World, because in the New World they were basically seen as expendable. But anyways, so what happened is when the Europeans first started trying to get around Africa, just to get to India, they set up outposts where they could resupply their ships and trade with the locals. And one of the things that really changed everything in Africa was the introduction of firearms, guns. Basically, the Europeans would only trade guns for slaves and vice versa. They would not accept anything else in exchange for guns. And guns gave tribes who had them extreme advantages. Guns are superior weapons in every possible way. Those terms of steel, right? And so what happened was, as tribes that got them tended to use them to acquire more slaves so they get more guns. And basically, this is a forward positive feedback loop. We need more slaves, we need more guns, so we get more slaves. Makes sense, right? Well, of course, then our enemies are going to be like, crap, we're losing because we don't have guns. We better trade slaves for more guns so we can. Basically, this is where the transatlantic slave trade starts siphoning off people out of Africa. Now, another problem that's been proposed for the long-term economic situation in Africa is consider what type of characteristics the Europeans are looking for in the slave markets. What type of slaves that they want? Strong. What else? Well, male, female, and healthy, sure. What else? Well, you can make them hardworking. Intelligent or dumb? Intelligent. You think, well, wouldn't you want them kind of dumb so they wouldn't run away? No. Because you can make anyone not run away. That's just social conditioning. We've seen it time and time again. But I'm not going to get into too much sociology here. Not to mention, the treatment of escaped slaves was beyond brutal. But intelligence was a good thing, because if you have a smart slave, then they can do more complicated tasks than a dumb slave can, yes? So, imagine what would happen to a country, or in this case, a bunch of countries, if we take out their best, their brightest, their strongest, their healthiest people for 400 years. Well, I'm not going to say Africans are stupid. That's really unfair. But I will say this: there's definitely a brain drain effect. You know, whenever you're losing your best and your brightest. Furthermore, look at the way that Europe sets up the colonies in Africa. Basically, the purpose of the colony is to extract natural resources. So essentially, every European country, or rather every African country, is being forced to export its wealth. And if you look at an economy, if you look at the whole system, everybody interconnected, the folks who produce raw materials are on the bottom of the food chain. They're getting the least amount of value for the finished product, because every time a product changes hands, the price goes up. So this is why, for instance, if you can buy directly from a manufacturer, you're going to save some money. It's just most of the time manufacturers don't want to sell directly because it's not worth their time to package, one or two things. They're going to sell to you, you're going to have to buy in bulk. So if you want to go buy Hellmann's mayonnaise for a good, decent price, you're going to have to buy something like 150,000 gallons. So I hope you like mayo. Anyhow, colonial rule sets up Africa to be in this dependence economic speaking. That's why they often refer to the current economic system as neo-imperialism, because to this day, a lot of African nations still rely on producing primary resources for their economic activity, and that pays them less. Another major problem comes from education. Why are you in school? To learn, because I want to learn things. Fair enough. Why do you want to learn things? To get to college. Why? Yeah, it all comes down to money, doesn't it? Money motivates, doesn't it? There's nothing wrong with that. That's, what it is, Well, people say that, and it is and it isn't. For one thing, you actually get a title when you do that. Like title of nobility, you get one of those when you get a degree. The other thing is that nowadays, it's really as much as anything about having a foundation of work. Someone who has a college education, and especially certain fields, versus someone who doesn't, will simply know more about what needs to be done. They have an understanding of the basis of the product. Yeah, there's certain jobs you really don't need a college education, even if they require it, but most of them you'll find you got to have a basis. For instance, let's talk teaching. What type of degree do you have to have? Well, you do have to have a master's degree, yes, but what type of master's degree? Let's talk about this. Hypothetically speaking, you can teach if you have a master's in education. Okay, basically, you've learned how teaching works, educational psychology, things like that. However, most teachers don't do that. Why? Because if you only have an education degree, you have no other background, you're basically going to be able to teach teachers how to teach. That's all you can do. If, however, though, you go and get a degree in, say, like science or math, and then you go on and get a master's in education, or in the case of a lot of folks in MAC, you will get the ability to teach because you have the education background, but also you'll have a lot of stuff to draw upon for whatever courses you'll be teaching, if that makes any sense at all. So it does benefit you directly, because also, depending on what type of job you want, you hope to get paid a lot more money, yes? That's the whole objective. What if I were to tell you that no matter how much education you had, you'd be stuck working on a farm? Why would you? Why would it wouldn't benefit you, correct?
Mm-hmm.
This is the fate of a lot of Africans, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, because there's no direct benefit. Although, you'll find some folks who have the ability will send family members away to other schools, other places. But I digress. That's getting off topic. The modern era, one of the big question marks is what happens after self-rule? You see, these colonies were eventually freed. What happened to them since then? Why do they not have self-rule? Or if they do have self-rule, why are there so many problems? Well, it really comes down to three main things. I've written them on the board over there for you. Weak governments, weak economies, and civil unrest. First of all, let's talk weak economy or weak governments. Once the Europeans were gone, the question had to be decided who's in charge. So you basically set up democracy. You might remember I talked to you guys about tribalism, yes? An identity that people have about their cultural background as to who they are. Tribalism is all throughout Africa. And basically, in the more successful African nations, you had less of the tribalism. Where you had more tribalism, you run into problems. Going back to the Berlin Conference of 1884, what happened was before the Europeans really started conquering Africa, they had to deal with a problem. See, all the various European powers wanted to conquer Africa. They were kind of vying with each other for who got to conquer where. So in order to avoid a global war, the European powers met in Berlin and partitioned Africa. Partition means they cut it up, basically. Each European power got to conquer one particular area. This is a picture showing them meeting at the conference. And no Africans were actually invited. No Africans were consulted. They were just forgotten about. The purpose of this was to set up states within the European councils that would be conquered, and also to avoid war with each other. But in addition, it was set up to try to help facilitate the conquest of Africa. So you had different African nations that were established through European conquest that included different tribes that were enemies with each other. The purpose of this was pretty simple, divide and conquer. If the tribes are fighting each other, they're not going to worry about banding together against the Europeans. This keeps everybody nice and confused and basically creates problems. Now, once these countries were free, you still have tribal enemies, because this tribal identity goes back thousands of years. They don't just identify as suddenly being from Niger or being from Egypt, although Egypt was more successful than others. So basically, they couldn't get along. Whenever you have people unwilling to compromise, democracy falls apart. Add into this, their economy was weak. They had been set up as, like we said, as these primary natural resource producers, so their economy could never grow. Yes, please. And so this contributed to civil unrest, as basically people were, without opportunities. They had this problem with, their governments. People started looking out for themselves. In some cases, you had civil wars erupt. And all three things in some of these countries have to be settled before you can have self-sustaining self-rule. So these are problems that are being addressed in various ways. Another thing that tends to divide folks in Africa is the fact that every tribe pretty much has its own language. And so to get people to get along, you either have to know all languages, which in some cases is practically impossible, or you have to settle on another language as being the language we're going to use. So for instance, English is often used. You also have French being a very large place, especially in Western Africa. And in Northern Africa, Arabic is the language of choice. So they just kind of adopt another language. But it means that many Africans are multilingual, 2 or more languages. Another thing to understand is that in tribal societies, the tribal identity is more significant than one's cultural or national, one's legal country of inhabitation. Meaning, let's analyze what is a tribe. Because that's I think if you understand what a tribe is, all this makes a lot more sense.
It's your people that live in the same town.
Yeah, but let's go further. What it really is it's a family line. It's a bigger version of family. Technically, a tribe is a group of people that share a common ancestor. Now, there's more to it than that, because tribal identity is not only one's family, but it's one's ethnicity, one's language, one's culture, one's outlook on life. By being part of a tribe, you know who your friends and who your enemies are. It's a sense of belonging we really do not have in this country, in this side of the world. The problem with that, though, is that it's naturally divisive. It's a form of nationalism. And so it makes democracy really, really hard. It also means they live in what are called stateless societies in many cases. A state is like a political institution. Like, for instance, the United States is a state with capital S. It is not a nation. Even though we tend to say one nation under God, that doesn't actually mean anything. Because nation has to do with culture. So, one's cultural identity. In the case of a stateless society, there is no government per se. Instead, it's family rule. So basically what it means is whatever your parents say is the literal law. Think about that for a second. Yeah, right? Nowadays, as we're going to see tomorrow, the culture tends to be a mix of Western and African traditions. There tends to be some European ideologies mixed with what is traditionally African. Let me show you a map real quick. You guys got this okay? You mean hold on a sec. What? Okay. This shows the language maps that we're talking about. And again, it's amazing what type of technology people have access to. Cell phones have changed the world. Internet access is much more available throughout the world. Africa is no exception to this. For instance, most people tend to think Africans live in something like this, yes? That tends to be what Americans think of as terms of living in Africa. This is more common. Although this isn't uncommon either. Now let me ask you a question. How many of you guys would have thought I showed you this and think, man, that's Africa?
No.
Probably not, no? Again, we have this attitude that Africans are living this traditional lifestyle. In some cases they are, but not most Africans. Most Africans are living in cities nowadays. More and more we're seeing industrialization occurring. More and more we're seeing changes that are dramatically altering our perspective of what Africa is. The biggest problems they have are these three. If they can solve these problems, suddenly there's a lot of changes going on. South Africa is probably the greatest example of that. It's the most successful of the African countries. They've had a lot of help from Britain. But a lot of these other ones, they're dealing with it. Of course, not to say South Africa did have its fair share of civil unrest as well, with apartheid, things like that. We'll get to more of the issues aspect of this later. Do you guys have any questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. Which one? What? New Zealand.
I'll write you down. Alrighty. Well, we'll call that a day then.
Maybe wait this week on Saturday.
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe.